It's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Patricia Lucas from our School of Sport and Recreation at AUT. I've known Tricia probably for the time I've been at AUT, about 5 years, and she looks after the cooperative papers for Sport and Rec. Now, Tricia's bio is actually on the guidebook app that we've got, but there's something in there which I thought was quite relevant to the Mahara for the last 2 days. Tricia holds a PhD in education from Deakin University, where she focused on understanding students' utilisation of critical reflection to enhance and support learning in a cooperative education context. So I thought that was quite relevant to what we've been hearing the last couple of days. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Tricia. Away you go.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. And thank you for coming along to my presentation this morning. As Lisa said, my name is Tricia Lucas. I've got my formal name up on there, but most people call me Tricia. And I belong to the Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences here at AUT, and I straddle a couple of schools. I'm predominantly positioned within the School of Sport and Recreation, where most of my work has been done, in particular my research. But I'm also in the Interprofessional School of Interprofessional Health Studies as well. And my role in these areas is mostly in the space of work integrated learning. So that's where my primary focus is. And I'm here today, I feel like a bit of a fraud really, because I'm not using Mahara yet. So I'm kind of here to find out what you guys are doing, and my presentation today is a number of questions that I've got in my head that I'm thinking about as I'm going through the journey of exploring how to develop an ePortfolio that is going to do the sorts of things that I think are important when we are looking at graduates. So as I'm going through my presentation today, there are a number of questions, and I've kind of posed a few potential answers, but I'm kind of interested in what you think as well. So if you would like to contribute as we go along to some of the questions that I'm posing, that would be fantastic. And also what I want to try and do with my presentation is, because I'm not an official user yet of Mahara, I am playing a little, so I'm going to talk about some of my experiences with Mahara kind of towards the end. So the front end is really more the questions that and the things I'm thinking about as I'm going into the space of using ePortfolios with our graduates. So I'm hoping that number one, you'll be able to perhaps engage in some conversation with me about the questions I'm asking, and number two, that maybe the questions might be a little bit provocative for you as well to think about in your own spaces in terms of using the ePortfolios that you're currently using. Okay, so in my head is, where are we heading? And I'm heading down the track of looking at using ePortfolios, and the theory behind, we've talked about pedagogy a little bit today in terms of ePortfolios and what have you, and one of the theorists that I particularly like to use, in fact this is the theory that underpinned all of my PhD work, is John Dewey. And I think it's really important to kind of think about the learnings that we can take into the platforms that we're using, and I particularly like this little quote up here about the fact that we're looking at us as continuous lifelong learners and not just our students, us as academics and the rest of it. I've used this, I like to use imagery a little bit as I go through things to kind of highlight my thinking and to highlight where I'm going. This is a photo from on my farm. I've got a farm up at Waiwera, and people often think sheep are pretty dumb, but in fact sheep are quite clever, and these sheep here have looked over at me. I've come to the fence, to the gate, and they're looking at me in anticipation. And I kind of feel like I'm a little bit like that with my students. They look at me in anticipation. What are you going to do with us, you know? Where are you going to take me? And these girls here, if I'd opened the gate, they would just come on through. And so I kind of feel a little bit like this is sometimes the experience of my students. They're the ones looking at me for the guidance. And they're not all sheep. They're not all going to go through all at the same rate. And my sheep aren't really all the same either, even though they might look very similar. So I thought I'd start off a little with you thinking about, well, where are we going? What are my thoughts? And before I wanted to go anywhere too far down the track, in my mind I think it was important to have an understanding of what education meant and what employability meant, because I think sometimes there can be a little bit of confusion around what these two things might be, whether they are connected or disconnected. Even though when we look at the language that has been used up here, Dewey's language is a little bit old-fashioned, I suppose, but his words really resonate with me in terms of what's happening in our learning environment, and that's a really important thing. And I think sometimes, as we were going through, as I've been listening to the number of the conversations over the last couple of days, I can see how ePortfolios fit into this environment where we talk about it expanding and contracting, and how we could use that to work our way through this learning environment that we set up for our students. But then where does that take them to into the future? So I'll let you have a quick read of what John Dewey's definition of education is, and then also what York and Mance have said about employability. So education, I think, is something that deals with knowledge and skill, but it also goes beyond that in terms of thinking about those, we talked about them the other day, those soft skills and those other things that we invest in our learning environments that take us through into the future. So it's not something that stops at the end of our degrees, it's something that hopefully will become lifelong, and we set up some good habits as students go through their degrees. On the other side of the coin there, we've got employability, and employability is not just about getting a job. Okay, it's a whole lot of other things. And in this language, of course, remember, it's quite debatable. When you read the literature, there's going to be various different opinions about what these words might mean. And I think employability at the moment is getting a lot of airplay, and it's a word that's being, really looked closely at, and what does this actually mean? I think the crux of York and Mance's definition there is actually that it's something that there are skills and attributes and things like that, but it's going to be beneficial to the person themselves. It's also going to be benefit to the workforce ultimately, but also the community and the economy. So it's the big picture stuff, which is what education is about as well. It's not just what we get at the end of the degree. It's what, where does that take us to, and what have we got to look forward to after that. So the first question that I had in my mind was, well, what's happening in higher education? And universities have changed. When we look back historically, the old Humboldtian university was a very elitist organisation. And nowadays universities have much stronger links with business and society and academic worlds. And we've moved from a privileged few going to universities to this massification, which I think someone mentioned earlier on in the conference, where en masse we've got large numbers of people coming to university, and they're thinking about where they're going to go to in the future in terms of employment. There's also a lot more social accountability, and these things influence the way that we engage with the students, the way that we look at our educational practices, and the sorts of knowledge that we expect students to walk out the door with at the end. What might that knowledge look like? What is the kind of knowledge that's important? Bearing in mind that we're really looking at a world that's in constant change. And I think one of the things also that's always in the forefront of my mind is that even though my students might be graduating at the end of 3 years, are some of them going to actually have, is there going to be work? What is work, and what will work be like in the future? There's also increased global investment. So many more graduates are now coming out of universities with degrees, so there's a lot more diversity of individuals coming through. Look at the number of degrees that we've also got on offer out there, and how do young people even make these choices sometimes in terms of what sort of degrees to do. Universities are adopting business models, and then what is my role as an educator in this really complicated place and space where I've got pressure on me from the university to do certain things, I've got students wanting and having certain needs, and then I've got the bigger picture of what is happening, where am I leading these people to in the future. Anybody else like to add anything to that I've missed? No? So what does the industry and the government expect? Because at the end of the day, a lot of the strings that are being pulled in universities, and we've been hearing a lot of stuff just recently out in in the airplay about what's happening inside universities. But the pull in terms of industry and government at the moment is that industry wants or work-ready graduates. They want skills, they want knowledgeable graduates, but they also want those soft skills and things as well. So that's in there. There's an understanding potentially that if students arrive ready for work, that there's less time training them when they arrive. So that's kind of seen as a plus for industry. That's the sorts of things they're asking for. They want graduates that are matched to the market needs, even though that could be constantly changing. And I think we have to kind of bear that in mind. It's that they might tell us today what they need, but is it going to be the same in 3 years' time? So how do we kind of negotiate that? What are the skills and attributes that are required by the student? Because organisations vary hugely from one to the other, and students get really confused about what might be needed, you know, from organisation to organisation. And we also, as academics, can get very confused about that kind of stuff too. So how do we prepare students for an industry that is changing, and quite rapidly too as well?
And you also get industries that can't agree among themselves about what they need.
Yeah.
Experience of sitting in on a trades ITO advisory board for car mechanic apprentices, and the fight that went on between the small two-people garages and the large franchises was a real blow for it.
Yeah. So, you know, so we're trying to produce graduates that are going out to a world that is diverse as well as these diverse students. We've got the government, of course, pushing away in there as well. There was the New Zealand government put out the tertiary education strategy, which covered 2014 to 2019, and I haven't gone through the whole document, but what I have pulled out was that there is a clear focus on preparation for employment. So this was kind of one of the main thrusts that came out of this particular piece of documentation. So again, you know, what does that mean, and you know, how do we negotiate that as well? And we've also got the government imposing education fees on students as well. So that we've got these things, and behind the big picture of what higher education means, it costs money to go to a university. Students are paying fees, and the university is the way that we're structured and paid for waste when students come out at the end of the day, which was all the hoo-ha last week in the media. What about parents and prospective students? We want jobs, you know, like they want to get well-paid jobs and they want to have future career prospects. So when people come through to, you know, these open days and things like that, I'm often standing there talking to parents and they go, well, what can young Johnny do with this degree? You know, what kind of job are they going to get? So that's often at the forefront of parents and students as well. And of course everyone goes to university, don't they? You know, so that's the other kind of message that's out there in schools. And I think, you know, part of that potentially, and I'm, you know, raving a little bit here, is that maybe when the apprenticeship scheme was put aside there for a while, maybe that's changed a little bit of the culture and the thinking that's happening out in schools. So what does that mean for us, you know, back here in education platforms? There's also possibly an expectation that stems from the idea that, well, I've paid for this. And I hear this often from students, and they go, well, what am I getting for my money? You know, like, what are you giving me in terms of, you know, I've paid for it. So is it money well spent for the students? So yes, we are providing a service to a certain degree. I'm not going to go into that debate, but there are people or students coming through that are looking at whether they're spending their money well. And so what are we providing that's going to help them see value in what we do with them? And who decides what is relevant? You also hear students saying things like, well, you're just asking me to learn for the sake of learning. You know, like, learning? You know, I only want to learn the stuff that's important. So that's, you know, another challenge that we have with current students as well, thinking about those sorts of things. Anybody like to add anything to my short list there? Covered all bases, almost. And then the academics. So we've got this tripartite kind of thing happening here. The students, we've got the bigger picture out there in the industry, and then you've got what's happening here in the world of academia. And most of us in universities have an idea of what a graduate should look like. So I've just put up the graduate profile that we use in our Bachelor of Sport and Recreation degree, because it was easy, I had it. And there are lots of things in there, as you can see. We're thinking about people who are going to go out and be leaders potentially. We want those effective communication skills, those soft skills that we've been talking about. We want adaptive and innovative people. We want critical thinkers. We want them to engage in the literature in terms of research. And we've got to think about the big world as well in terms of professionals who are ethical and able to kind of negotiate the world as well. So we're asking a lot, really, of our graduates at the end of our degrees. So how do we work it, and what do we do to produce a graduate that can tick all those boxes, and we can safely send them out into the big wide world feeling like they are prepared for a world that's constantly changing.
And do you think it's time that universities particularly got a bit more honest about the destination for high-level graduates like PhD students and the high possibility of PhD unemployment?
That's a big thing.
And the lack of academic pathways for them to get a meaningful career in academia.
Yep.
I mean, I wonder a lot about that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. We also, and because I work in the area of work integrated learning as well, a lot of the literature that I'm reading and thinking about stems in this next little bit here, where we're thinking about how we prepare students to be work ready and what that might mean. But as an educator, and those of us that are interested in education, it's how do we move beyond the job notions, because like you say, some people won't necessarily find jobs that they either don't exist at the moment, they may exist in the future, or they might have to create their own. So there's all those sorts of things to think about as well. So work ready isn't really, I think, the end goal. Career ready, potentially, okay, let's see about the long-term prospects, where might that take us. But maybe the better word in here is future ready, all right, which means that hopefully we've got people that can negotiate the world as it changes, and find their place and space in a forward-moving way. And then you touching on that last bit there, I guess like the focus is often on preparing students for beyond the university, but we also have to think about the ones that we want to keep within the university system. So preparing those future academics, the people that are going to replace me. So I'm interested in those people. I'm interested to find out how do we nurture those people so that they come back and they carry on the job that I'm doing right now, or taking it further into the future. We want to also cultivate these future, highly intelligent, Nobel Prize winning kind of people too. They come from us. They're the ones that we're nurturing on the way through. And there's always these little shining stars that pop out. How do we kind of keep them going too? Anything else that you'd like to add to that? Yes.
Just I find it interesting, and you look across various profiles, not this one specifically, but others across universities, institutes, whatever, even at the secondary level. And a lot of the times, what they put up front is those soft skills. And rarely I find at the top subject matter experts. Yet we still assess to a large extent that, because it's easy to quantify. That's kind of what it is. Can you recall this book and what's on page 38, paragraph 3? If yes, then you pass. But all those things, critical thinking at the middle is perfect. I usually use ethics as well. And, to be ethical appears in the law. How do you assess it? How do you guarantee somebody is ethical? And the answer is, well, you can't. You can pretend to be ethical. That's fairly straightforward, but you can never guarantee this as like a product. No. There's no quality control, no quality assurance on a lot of those things. Effective communicator, within a safe environment, university doesn't guarantee you're going to be like that.
No. Yeah.
So I give them lots of really good authentic tasks to do along the way, like handwriting for 3 hours on paper. I mean, that's really important for the authentic work environment.
You still have to sign the back of your
Anyway, so these are the sorts of things that I've got in the back of my mind as I'm thinking about embarking on using portfolios. So I guess I'm kind of heading down the track of thinking about, so what are the tensions and disconnects that I'm kind of feeling at the moment that might be present that I might have to think about as I start to, you know, go down the track of importing and using ePortfolios. And one of the things, of course, is thinking about the contemporary academic. Who is this person nowadays? You know, how do I perceive myself even as an academic? I have to think about that. Okay, we're being pushed to be passionate about research, right? That's a big thing within a university environment nowadays. We think we should be passionate about teaching. I personally think teaching is what I'm there for. That's what the students, you know, they're the ones that bring in all the money into the university. So we have to be passionate about teaching, we have to be passionate about research, and then we have to be technologically savvy as well. And that's a really hard thing to do when we're trying to manage papers, trying to manage students, and be engaged with the latest technology in terms of how do we keep our students up with the play too. And I was trying to introduce the ePortfolio into our new BSR program this year, but unfortunately I'm on sabbatical at the moment, and because I wasn't present and I wasn't there to drive the thing, everyone else is a little bit too afraid. So there's that element to it, a little bit of the fear for the academic to actually step into using something new that we don't necessarily understand yet. There's tensions between the latest developments potentially that we uncover in research within the university and maybe with the reality of the workplace as well. So that's a little bit of a tension. We might be generating all this world-breaking, earth-shattering research here in the university, but does it really reflect the things that are happening in reality out in the workplace and out in industry? So how do we connect those sorts of things up in here as well? And then going back to thinking about what is the purpose of a university degree and who is it for? Is it for the student? Is it for the industry? Is it for the university? And there are different perspectives if we look at those three dimensions, and how do we align those and how do we connect them up so that we're actually all working together for the same purpose and the same kind of goal. Another thing that I think portfolio work is really important for is thinking about how we enable the students to actually look at their own academic progress. And of course I wrote this before I found out about the smart evidence stuff, so that's kind of, I have managed to answer quite a number of my questions by being here, so that's kind of cool, that's been really helpful. So the smart evidence thing, I can kind of see how that fits in here, but also I think it's really important for the students to have a sense of an academic, I guess, intelligence of some kind. So like we say that emotional intelligence and all that sort of stuff is important, but having a sense of valuing what you understand as an intellectual and how do we negotiate that rather than them thinking, oh, you know, like I just have to tick the boxes and I have to, you know, once I've done that then I can pass the paper and C's get degrees anyway, that kind of attitude. So how do we kind of connect that up, that academic progress, with seeing that these things, if you do them really well, are really valuable out in industry, but they are actually connected in a way. And also, I'm not sure what industry wants from an ePortfolio. So I think, you know, we need to think about that as well. So how do we ensure that the things that the students are actually doing, and maybe it just has to be so flexible that whatever we do with the students in terms of developing their portfolios are going to be able to be morphed and changed for, you know, whatever, wherever they see that they can use their portfolios once they leave the university. So that's kind of where does it go to from here. Anything else to add to that? Any other tensions I should be thinking about? Am I going for time? So, my question is, with all those things rambling around the back of my head, can an ePortfolio help to bridge the gap? So am I stepping into a place in a space where I can use the ePortfolio to actually support the students in a way that cultivates the educational aspects of the educational development, the intellectual development of the student, but also prepares them for the industry demands that may happen to be out there. Because I work in work integrated learning, I'm constantly thinking about, and our students are actually out in industry, so I think we kind of help a lot with bridging the tensions and the gaps that I've identified there. But how do I use an ePortfolio with my students in a way that helps to bridge the gap between the university education, the workforce needs, and satisfying and aligning all these three things up? And I guess the nice thing about the portfolio is that it is one platform with multiple functions. So for me, I guess one of the things I'm going to have to think about is, what function do I start with? Where do I begin? Because it is complicated, and I know that once we start asking academics to use it, it's not just the student that needs to know how to use the platform, it's the academic as well. Right, so I'm really cognizant of that. And if the academics don't really want to get in, don't understand it, or aren't prepared to put time into becoming comfortable with it, it's not going to work for the student either. So that's a really important thing, I think, for me personally to be thinking about. I can see it being a really cool place to apply theory and practice, so that students actually use it as a place and a space for that. So my whole PhD, like Lisa said, was looking at critical reflection, and one of the key things I believe critical reflection is there for is to help students marry up their theory with their practice. Work integrated learning is about integrating theory and practice. Where do you do that integration? The only place you can really do it is if you critically reflect on your experience and you look at the theory and how you've applied it to practice. And maybe it doesn't work, or maybe it does. So there's lots of things to think about in there. I also think that it's important to think about personal and professional development, and I think the earlier potentially that you can put an ePortfolio perhaps into a program, the more likely that the students are going to buy into being able to see their own personal and professional development. I think that's a really important part of the portfolio. I certainly see it in my students when they go off into working, they're out into their workplaces across the year. So our students are out for a whole year for 2 days a week, and they have a reflective journal that they keep, and they reflect each week, once a week. And by the time they've done that for a year, and you look back, and they look back in their reports on their experiences, they can see that growth. And that's a really important thing, I think, for students to feel like they've prepared and they've grown personally and professionally in order to step out into the workplace. I think it's also important that students can examine their own academic progress. So again, the evidence, smart evidence has kind of covered that base for me there. Easy access to the information in the future, I think it's a really important thing. Looking at being able to provide evidence for the industry, which we've been talking about, which is really cool. And I like this last statement here, which I stole from somebody. I didn't reference it, but I did. Where students who engage in their employability are likely to be independent, reflective, and responsible learners. I liked that. I thought that was really cool. If I could do that with my students, I'd be really happy. So anyway, your thoughts on that? Anything else in there that portfolios?
Yeah, I'd like to share something. I've experienced that students like to set their portfolio to the external reviewer, somebody HR, and then it could be someone practitioner in the industry, it could be the manager, it could be a friend, it could be someone who actually do this in many years, and their feedback will also appear below their portfolio page, and that is also available. You can set that to all your potential employers as well. So people can see the portfolio and also see the feedback from the industry, from their people, and at a certain time. So that could be very helpful for students in terms of employability.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the referee, some of the senior work and they're doing,
Let alone in that form.
Yeah, very informal process.
You can see with time that people give the common feedback.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I better zoom along quickly. So my experience so far with Mahara has just been having little chats with Lisa to try and understand the platform. Like I said, I'm on sabbatical at the moment. I'm actually using Mahara to record and collect and all my things because I have to submit a report when I come back after my 6 months. So I will have everything all in one place in space so I can use it. I've got a student who's been my guinea pig, and I just literally sent her off while she was out on her work placement over summer and asked her to use Mahara instead of our other platform which wasn't available to her. few problems in there, and that I didn't give her any guidance. I just said go for it. Yeah, and she expected, and I put the cats up there. She expected because she thought that Mahara looked like Blackboard, which she had used, so she used it in the same way, and we kind of became tangled. So I've got the tangling cats up there. Those cats look the same, but actually they're not. Right, so we've I call that my Zoe tangle, because that's what happened with her. She got really tangled up with the two platforms, and they weren't, even though they looked the same, they weren't. And I've also encouraged one of my colleagues who's doing postgrad to use Mahara as a platform for her to go through with her PhD work, and she's using it to communicate with her supervisors. Now, I think that's a really good place and space for Mahara, so I've got my eye on that. I think that's a good place to go. If I'd been doing my PhD, I'd be using it. Anyway, so where to from here? I'm thinking about how I'm going to explore and kind of, I guess, see what's happening in terms of my students' experiences. That's a picture from the top of my farm. I kind of feel like I've got the little picture at the front in clear view. I've got lots of fog in the distance, so I'm kind of heading into that fog, I think. Anyway, that's my story. Thank you so much.
Any final questions for Patricia?
Hopefully we answered lots of questions all the way through.
Patricia will be available. Oh, here we go.
Not really a question, but I like what you said at some point. They can see the growth, and I think there's something to unpack there, almost like a Mahara underpinning would be where you could have all the courses, all the papers across all the years, all the semesters, building again in unison towards everything, and say, yeah, you're doing math 101, and then you're doing human anatomy 101, but somehow through Mahara you could have this connection where they put things in perspective themselves. And I mean, we can offer this guidance at the top. We've talked in the different groups about templates and things like this, but put that thing in unified version, which is what happens when you go to work.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, today you're doing report writing, and then tomorrow we're going to do data gathering. That's not the way it works. You're doing everything at the same time. And I think there's something about that physical growth and that sense of achievement and accomplishment, and looking back and saying, that's what I wrote when I was in year one. Like, there's something that you lose track of. Do you remember your assignment that you had in the first year? No. Back in the days when it was paper, because if you're lucky, if you're organized, stored in a box at your mom and dad. Well, no, mine are gone already. But, you know, and then we can move electronically in Google Docs and everything, and just like that piles up in your electronic dumping zone, and you never go back.
And I think that's the nice thing about having the Mahara portfolio go through the 3 years of a degree, and it's structured within that, which is what we're ultimately trying to do in the BSR, is that when you get to the point where, like in doing the work in creative learning modules, we can say to you, go back and see what you've done in X, Y, and Z paper, and you need to be thinking about this stuff here and now within the context of your work environment, so that they don't lose that stuff, because they often don't see how things are connected. And that hopefully is a good way of making those connections and bringing that stuff back in again to look and explore it in a deeper way, in a more meaningful way.
Is that in that case the problem with getting everybody, I mean, all the teaching staff on board? Every single person that's involved in every single course in the program has to be on board with the Mahara approach. And my mind is just exploding in the background, like, oh my God, well, the discussions and the battles and everything are going to be insane. But it does feel like there's something there. So I think probably the next challenge that we all have is how do you pitch it at the course, at the program.
Get them using it themselves.
Yeah.
That's right done. Yeah. And that's starting to work with a few people that are using it and come back and So I think, that's one of the reasons why I'm using it myself, is that if I can understand and I can work my way through it, then I can connect with the students and kind of champion it myself. So if you've got academics who are using it themselves, then they will champion it with the students. So yeah, we've got to get them using it. And that's my goal.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you. This is just a little gift from us to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm sure Tricia will be available for questions at the next break or whenever.
Thank you.